So welcome again to now we're at session 6. And I thought I'd do a quick little fun thing about C.S. Lewis. If I can remember how to do all this again. Here we go. All right, can y'all see that?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Slide over so I can see everybody. Yep.
So here's a fun fact of C.S. Lewis. The Screwtape Letters book, which I've taught on that one, kind of like we're doing this a couple different times. Oops. Shoot, I just muted you, Wesley, and I didn't mean to. Hey, Kat and Wesley, when Kat gets back, just have her unmute you. I was trying to click something else. Okay, good. So Uncle Screwtape, the Screwtape Letters is a book where he writes as if he were a senior demon writing to a junior demon about how to turn the humans away from God. And so this is a fact I found. Lewis never expected to make any money from his books, any of them. He was sure they would all be out of print by the time he died. He advised one of his innumerable correspondents that a first edition of the Screwtape Letters would not be worth anything since it would be a used book. He advised not paying more than half the original price. And so the fact I found was they now sell for $1,200.
Whoa. Goodness. That's cool. That's not a picture of C.S. Lewis.
No, that's Uncle Screwtape, some artist version of it. All right, today we're doing book 3, chapters 7 through 10, and I hope everyone got my updated course outline.
Yes. We did.
Because I had 5 chapters in for one day, and that was too much. So today we're going to talk about forgiveness, the great sin, charity, and hope. So we'll start with an onboard question for everybody. What is sin? And then take a crack at what's the greatest sin.
Cool. Let's not all talk at once.
Well,
I would say
if your conscience feel uncomfortable, I'll start with that.
sin is the turning away from God and his ways. And so that is why the Hebrew and Greek words for repentance have to do with a complete full stop of what you were once doing to turn toward Christ to seek forgiveness from our sin. And then the greatest sin is in speaking against the Holy Spirit and continuing in ways that are completely unrepentant and evil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He says it pride.
Well, but you see so quickly how pride leads you to that place.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I mean, an unchecked pride would absolutely. So I agreed with him about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
I guess continuing on a vein of without listening to others, your community, without listening to some other voices that you might trust. And I agree with Victoria of turning away from God. It's that separation from God. But I think that God sends people into our lives that will help us get on the right path and continually turning away from those voices, to not think of them and to think of a better way is a great sin. And I think that is pride, because you think that you know it all.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think the caricature of the word sin is? What do you think sort of the common, I would say, less informed definition of sin would be?
Well, I can tell you what I've heard you say.
What?
Missing the mark.
Well, no, that's actually not the caricature. That's literally the meaning of the Greek word, I think, in some place in the New Testament where it uses the word sin. It literally means missing the mark. So you're aiming for something and you're missing it. What I was thinking of is people that think sin is just this evil. You know, this is, you're going to do some great evil. You're a sinful person, which can miss the mark as far as what sin really means.
But it doesn't have to be some great, huge thing. It can be something quite small that leads to some huge thing.
Yeah.
Can sin be simple as breaking one of the 10 commandments, or is that too elementary?
Oh, no.
No, I'd say certainly,
Huge.
because the 10 commandments are the mark we're shooting for,
Yeah.
right? And if you miss the mark, I mean, you disobeyed one of those or more.
I mean, just think of all 10, and those are huge things when it comes to relationships with our God and with one another. So when we break those, it's not just elementary, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And when we're honest, we realize that looking at those 10 commandments, not a day goes by that you probably keep, absolutely, honestly, truly keep every one of them. Yet we absolutely do not want to admit that we are turning away from God.
Right.
Ooh, golly, don't make me say that.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
Start with
Yeah.
number 1, you turn away from God, and it's like, going
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
9 more. Yeah.
All right. Hold those thoughts, and I think all those are right. So the first thing he's going to tackle here is forgiveness. So I guess if we sin and we miss the mark, then we need to be forgiven. So let me just read a few outtakes, and anyone who has anything else from these chapters that you want to read or quote, please do. These are the things that I picked out. And remember, C.S. Lewis is trying to encapsulate what most Christians accept is, quote, Christianity, mere Christianity. So he starts out with what we find in Luke 11, forgive us our sins as we forgive those that sin against us. So that's where forgiveness comes in with the Christian faith. It is made perfectly clear that we do not forgive. If we do not forgive, we shall not be forgiven. There are no two ways about it. What are we to do? And then he goes on and he clarifies a few things. Love your neighbor does not mean feel fond of him or find him attractive. And then he says, imagine forgiving your enemies means making out that they are really not such bad fellows after all, when it is quite plain that they are. All right, well, let's just stop there. So we're defining forgiveness, what it is and what it isn't. So how do we do this?
Well,
Sometimes
it was a great comfort to me, and it made so much sense that forgiving someone does not necessarily mean embracing them.
right.
Yeah.
I think you learn a lot about a person, and you learn a lot about yourself when you forgive them. That doesn't mean you have to trust them. you can trust that they will probably fall back into the same ways they have behaved. And so then you're ready. You're ready for them to be that way. I liked it. It says, so loving my enemies does not apparently mean thinking them nice either. This is an enormous relief.
Yeah.
I think that I have thought that my forgiving people would make them stop doing what they're doing, but that is not the case.
Right.
And that's the hard part, because it, like you said, Mary, it's going to happen again and again. So we have to be vulnerable, and we're putting ourselves out there, and we're trying to do the right thing by forgiving. But we also know that most likely that's going to happen again.
Right.
Yep.
A word that often goes with forgiveness in a cliche is forgive and forget. And I think if you can forgive it and not hold on to it and just let it go and get over it, then it doesn't eat at you so badly.
Yeah.
Right. And also, it's like, it's not that I hate to even use the word hate. It's not that you don't like the person, it's you don't like the actions that they've done.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that helps.
Right, that does.
And he does state in here, I remember Christian teachers telling me long ago that I must hate a bad man's actions, but not hate the bad man. Or as they would say, hate the sin, but not the sinner. And sometimes we link so much that we cannot separate them from one another. And so we just go ahead and hate the person. Let's just hate them.
Hate is kind of natural. There's a number of places in this book where he tries to make the distinctions between feelings and your will. What sort of undergirds your belief in the existence of God, or your belief in what it is you are and what the world is. And he'll say it a number of times, your feelings can deceive you, and your feelings will change.
Yeah.
They can even change based on what you ate today, right? You can feel bad.
Right.
And
Also
so
suggestion many times.
yeah, he does.
Now, I picked up on something that, I don't really mean it all that critically. It's just I want to be careful not to do the same thing. But C.S. Lewis, he exactly clarifies something that would not be true all the time. In other words, he says, don't hate the bad man. Well, when you put yourself in that place and you're assigning it to a situation that you have, very readily you see that someone's not necessarily bad. I mean, I just don't like, he often does this. He takes a black and white view, and I just want to be careful not to do that. Because, I mean, I'm bad.
Don't you think we do that with people if they do things that are disagreeable to us? Don't we think that they're bad?
You don't want to think that they're totally bad,
Right.
You just want to, I feel like we should be careful not to assign too much, to someone that's wrong of us. That would be wrong of us and prideful, really.
Even people like Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's keep going, because he's gonna.
Hitler had a lot of awful bad actions, but he may have had some kind, some tender moments. He was
You are a generous person.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I just think that
I almost, for me, I think what he's talking about here is the disposition of my heart, my being towards someone else. I really don't think he's trying to define, badness, what all can be
He's
bad
not.
and bad.
He's not. I see that. I'm just saying that incidentally, he just makes that statement just sort of, I think, just to get it out there and make it easier. And
Yeah.
I think that's a slippery slope that we
Yeah.
need to be careful not to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the emphasis is on forgiveness.
Yes.
That's what this is about. It isn't determining that other person, but I think it is some cautionary tale to remind yourself that you are not doing much changing of the other person. That you are changing your way of handling things and dealing with things and people in particular.
All the more reason not to say Tom is bad.
Yeah.
I'm mad at Tom
let's
because he
see.
parked his car behind me.
Yeah. He tries to articulate this more in this, maybe this in the next slide. So he likes to put examples in there to at least let you know what he's thinking. So he says, suppose someone reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper. And remember, this was 1943. So the British knew all about atrocities. Then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not be quite true or not quite so bad as was made out. Is one's first feeling, quote, thank God, even they aren't quite so bad as all that? Yeah. Or is it a feeling of disappointment and even a determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies as bad as possible? And then he concluded by saying, if the first feeling, then it's a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. What does he mean? What is our first impulse? What came to mind to me is every news story to me seems, our mainstream news and even social media, lots of things are constructed to put something or somebody in the worst possible light.
Yeah.
And it seems like something that we'd like or something.
We'd like to feel bad, angry at someone who we hate. And when we find out that there's some good, some element that is not so bad, then it changes our thinking and we have to take some of that hate back and realize that there was some good, and it's just a lot easier to hate them.
Well, I'm not understanding. I'm reading this to say, if one's first feeling is thank God, even they aren't quite as bad, blah, blah, blah. So how can that, if we believe that, if that's our first feeling?
No, you know what? I think he's thinking about the second feeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Because okay, that helps me because I thought, right there.
I'll fix it.
To cling to the first story. Then it says, even determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies are as bad as possible.
Yeah, so that lost something in translation of picking out sentences.
Okay.
And
I got you.
slide.
That's okay.
Yeah, he definitely means if we're constantly going through life thinking the worst of everybody all the time, every time something happens, in the end, it will make us into devils. That's what Lewis thinks.
Well, people like to elevate themselves above the negative people. It subconsciously causes us to feel better about ourselves, even if we're not a good person. We just say, well, they're no good, and so I'm going to be above that. I am above that.
Yeah.
We don't take the high road. The high road would be to
forgive them.
Right, or just kind of, that's their choices. I'm not going to make a judgment. It's not something I would do, but, I don't know. Yeah. People feel good to elevate themselves and say, I'm not bad. I'm not as bad as that. I'm really good,
It's almost like catharsis. It's like we watching something really bad or some bad event happen. makes us feel a little bit better about our own situation. Isn't that kind of a catharsis almost?
Well, it's a feeling of superiority, and I think it goes to the next couple of chapters on pride.
Right.
Right.
Because, hey, I'm not like them. It's the publican and the Pharisee.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, I'm so glad I'm not like them.
Yeah. And I say that all the time. Boy, we're so glad we're not like them. Just kidding. We say it just to remind ourselves that no, we're not perfect.
I really love the way I want to remember his exact verbiage to wish a person's good, to wish good to someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That really works.
So he goes on about forgiving even our enemies. Even while we kill and punish, we must try to feel about the enemy. And remember, the Nazis were their enemy at the time. As we see, we must try to feel about the enemy as we feel about ourselves, to wish that he were not bad, to hope that he may in this world or another be cured. In fact, to wish his good. God intends us to love all selves in the same way and for the same reason. But he has given us the sum ready worked out in our own case to show us how it works. That makes sense?
If you read the book, it makes sense because he's talking about how we know we're not good, yet we still love ourselves.
Right.
And
so you need to be willing to give someone else the same benefit that you sort of subconsciously give yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that like the golden rule, really?
Yeah.
Sure, in the form of forgiveness. And, I want someone to forgive me if I do something terrible. I need to be willing to forgive on the same level. And similarly to the way God has forgiven us.
Yeah.
Right.
If we were all, in our 20s or 30s having this book club, would we still understand this concept the same? I mean, we have all evolved in our lives and we all have a faith and we practice it very well and very diligently, more or less, I mean, I think I was just thinking about that. If you asked us the same questions when we were in our 30s, would we still answer the same way? Would we still feel like we know good versus evil and the right way to act?
We have a different perspective, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would. I think with a group of people who might be like-minded, you could learn together to learn how to forgive. And I mean, it's a process. It isn't something that just snap you're forgiving of a person who has done you wrong overnight. I think you revisit it.
I'm so thankful that Jesus said to forgive 70 times 7, because there are times where
one time
I wasn't ready, but I knew he commanded me because of his love for me and the other person.
Yeah.
And through that continual process that speaks to that healing that's taking place in our souls, because the sin of others, particularly sins of innocence committed upon us at any time in our lives, causes wounds in our soul.
Mm-hmm.
And forgiveness is his gift to draw us into his heart and help in that healing, and to see ourselves more in his eyes and that other person also. I had such a wonderful, one time a person said to me that forgiveness is, if you look at the shape of a cross, it's that vertical. It keeps our relationship open with the living God, and the reconciliation are the arms. And sometimes we confuse and think it all has to happen at the same time, but the forgiveness is key first, and reconciliation requires everyone. And if they can't do that, then we can continue to forgive.
And I think Lucy's point's a good one. There's a time in my life when I couldn't do this. I think we do mature if we're determined to do that, if we're determined to learn who God is.
Right.
Remember, Lewis didn't come to these conclusions until he was in his 30s, at least.
Yeah.
And so it does take us, when you're young, it seems like you're just trying to impress, trying to make your way, make your mark, trying to make a living. And your whole, at least for me, my attitude was just almost combative and competitive. And I think with time and understanding that the feelings of retribution and feelings of resentment don't ever turn out too good.
Right.
But sometimes you have to go through it a lot.
And
Right.
with age, you can see outside yourself more easily than you can when you're younger. And this takes kind of a lifetime of practice.
Yeah, and I think when you're young, you're starting to become aware of how those hurts have affected you and how you can rise above them to do something about them. And then seeking the help that is needed. I came to some conclusions that the only way to get over some of those hurts was to forgive. And it had nothing to do with the other person for them to change or say they were sorry to me. But it was my forgiveness of them because I was harboring things against my mother primarily. And she didn't think that there was anything to be forgiven. But it was important for me to do that for my health and for my faith and my healing.
I didn't mean to get us off subject. I just was thinking about how,
It's perfect.
20, 30 years ago, could we have the same conversation that we're having tonight?
Yeah, not when I was young. I would say no.
I would say no also, because we evolve over time and we learn more and we're more accepting. But
so where's all those 30-year-olds that should be coming to St. Joseph's?
I know.
Right.
I know.
Don't you think, Tom, that one of the hardest things is like to forgive yourself before you can even forgive the other person? It's hard. Yeah.
Right.
It's a lifetime.
The golden rule is about how you see yourself as well as how you see other people. Yeah.
Right.
Let's go on to the great sin, and this is all going to be related. So if you have other comments, don't think you can't say them. So Lewis says in the opinion of the Christian minds he knew, that pride or self-conceit is the great sin, and the virtue opposite it is humility. All other sins, says Lewis, are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Each person's pride is in competition with everyone else's pride. It is because I want to be the big noise at the party that I am so annoyed at someone else being the big noise. To me, that just rings true. I mean, when you resent someone, it's probably because they took the place you thought you deserved or something. And so you get prideful about it. And he did describe how this isn't being proud of your son doing a good job in his homework. That's pride. This is a pride where you are comparing yourself to other people, basically. You agree? Why or why not?
So this is like your ego, in other words. You've got to be the big man at the top of the totem pole, and you want all the credit for everything. It's about me, my ego, how I feel.
Yeah.
I just looked up the definition of pride, and it says a feeling of deep pleasure or satisfaction derived from one's own achievements or the consciousness of one's own dignity. And
Yeah.
then I thought about the whole pride movement. Why do they call it that? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I had a hard time the first time I read this, because we're taught that pride is something we're supposed to have. I think what Lewis tries to describe here is that when God is teaching us to be mature, he's teaching us that you got to take your eyes off yourself. You can't constantly be comparing yourself to other people. That's kind of the sort of the short version for me.
And I think it's trying to elevate yourself at the expense of someone else's debasement.
Right.
And it's
Right.
interesting to me, for instance, when you look on page 126, he capitalizes the word pride, just like you have it, Tom, that has
this
to
next
do with
slide.
that diabolical enmity against God and others to elevate ourselves.
Yeah.
And then the pride that we also, that comes from a sense of love in seeing another person other than ourselves do well. And it's in that way, it's a phrase. It's not so much a part of our identity.
Yeah. Can you read these 3 bullets, Victoria, and then see if it's along the lines of what you're saying?
Lewis elaborates, it is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition has gone, capital pride has gone. The proud man, even when he has got more than he can possibly want, will try to get still more just to assert his power. Nearly all those evils in the world, which people put down to greed or selfishness, are really far more the result of pride. Power is what pride really enjoys. There is nothing that makes a person feel superior to other as being able to move them about like toy soldiers.
All right. So my question is, do we see this in our culture? Do you agree with them about pride? And do we see this in our culture now? Examples of it?
Yes, in politics.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's opening up a whole nother can of worms, though. Yes.
It is. But sometimes the politics, to me, in the end, it's about showing the other person wrong, showing I'm right, rather than solving the problem. I see that all. And so that's a power play. That's a pride thing.
Yeah.
And would the commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, or that covet thy neighbor's wife, enter into some of that? Because it's putting someone, it's like you feel inferior, and so there's some comparison and competition when you see other people that have something that you may not think that you have. You may have the very thing that this other person has, but you may think that it is less than what they have, and it stings. And you do.
Or it can be that you feel also that you wish that you had that, and you end up putting other people down to elevate yourself so that you feel better about yourself. It's all about yourself and how you feel, not how the other person feels.
I think there's a lot of turfism with jobs, even, and people feel like they are given short shrift in a job, and so they're hurt.
Here's a little interesting thing I read in a commentary. It says, a test to find out how much pride you have is to see just how much you dislike it in others.
Yeah.
Our pride is in serious rivalry with everyone else's pride. Lewis said we must be clear that pride is in essence competitive. The real pleasure of pride is not in having something, but in having more of it than others. True or false?
True.
True, absolutely.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Pride always means enmity. It is enmity. It is not only enmity between man and man, but enmity to God. In God, you come up against something which is in every respect immeasurably superior to yourself. Unless you know God as that, and therefore know yourself as nothing in comparison, you do not know God at all. As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as you're looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. Let us believe this can pass to us even as we try to please God, as we try to be and look godly. And he thinks somewhere, he says, this can make us diabolical.
That made me think of that whole statement of you have to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Right.
Right.
It's not how you look, it's what you really are. Right? And what your being says.
Looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. I just love that. I put a big star by that.
Yeah.
Well, Alice's comment about the Pride movement makes me wonder about that.
Well, I think that's probably a topic for another night, but it just struck me like the word pride, we're talking the word pride, and I was like, wait a minute, the pride movement is what we hear in the news.
Okay.
Kind of
Well,
ironic.
but he made a distinction later as he was kind of getting close to closing the chapter. And he said, receiving acknowledgement, that's not the kind of pride that will turn you into a diabolical self.
Right.
And I feel like the pride movement, and forgive me for just to make sure, I think of the pride movement as the homosexual. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
yes. Yeah, I should, all of that. But the truth is we do need to acknowledge, those that have not chosen the same orientation as us or whatever. Doesn't mean they're bad people.
No.
And I kind of feel like the way he interpreted the pride to say you should enjoy praise when you've worked hard.
Sure.
But
Recognition, acknowledgement. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Mary.
Yeah.
So I think of
To
the pride
Let
movement.
me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
What I was
no,
going to say is, listening to you, the thing that dawns on me is in any movement, politics or anything, when you get this little irritation that something's not right with it, how is it being used? Is it being used to punish somebody?
Right.
Like, is it being used to be critical, or is it being used to grab power in some way? Those are all questions we have to answer for ourselves.
Yeah.
As almost everything is set up as some kind of a competition, everything we see.
Yeah.
And you're wrong and I'm right. And, vote for my candidate because your candidate, the end of the world's going to happen if your candidate wins.
Right.
That is all rooted in pride and competition. So when you see real recognition of someone and you're trying to have compassion on someone and understand someone, you're not competing with them. Does that make any sense? And I think that's why pride could be viewed as the most dangerous vice. It's really setting us up against each other.
I keep
So what is
thinking
it?
of adding the word respect in here. If you respect yourself, you don't have to always feel like you're better than somebody else. And if you respect other people, you're not always going to try to put them down.
Right. Yeah.
Which has so much to do with how we see ourselves, and do we see ourselves as children of God or not? And I always know when I'm getting in the weeds with being pride, and I'm fall into it all the time. You know, it's when I start comparing myself, or I start feeling like the victim rather than seeing what is really going on. And all of these movements start off as a desire to say, I have worth. The culture has said I don't, but I do. So see me.
Yeah.
And there's always some injustice that has been happening for a long time that's really hard to all of a sudden correct, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Victoria, because some of this language here I had a real problem with. Like, it says, unless you know God as that, immeasurably superior, therefore you know yourself as nothing in comparison. Now, I'm not supposed to think of myself as nothing. What do y'all think about that?
Well,
why
in
did he?
comparison to God, I do think of myself as trash.
Yeah, that can almost borderline on unhealthy, though. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I really appreciate recycling, but that's the way I see myself. I am recyclable.
Yeah.
Over and over and over. You know, he saves me and tries to help me make something new.
I think he just got over ambitious in his metaphor.
I think so. Yeah.
Hey, Tom.
I think first and foremost, we are children of God. And so that is not nothing. That is quite a something. But I think there is a place that we know that we are a child of God, and we're not an adult of God. We don't know everything there is, and we're not a teenager of God. We're a child of God. And so we're still learning, but we're still part of that family.
But he just said in comparison. He was
I agree. I agree with you, Kat. And you know what it reminds me? You ever see the movie The Karate Kid?
Yeah.
The Karate Kid had to humble himself completely, or the Japanese man wasn't going to teach him karate. Like, he had to wax the car, wax on, wax off, and sand the floor and all that. I think that's a really good kind of metaphor to see. Until you're willing to see God for who God is, you're not in a position to receive what God has to offer. You might be letting your pride get in the way.
I mean, possibly. There are so many references in the scriptures to dying to self.
Yeah.
And
I think it's one of those paradoxes, isn't it? You know, that two things can be true at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 Insignificant and very significant.
Absolutely.
You're very loved, but not so much that you're loved so much that you can do anything that you want. You know, there's this balance and this tension, this good tension that keeps you sometimes on course, and sometimes it puts you off course so that you go, oh man, I'm losing my way. And so then you struggle to get back to the right way.
All right, I'm going to move to the next slide. Next. So that was a good discussion on pride. So then chapter 9, he talks about charity, and he talked about charity a little bit before, but in this time he's saying it's, quote, deeper than what used to be called alms. It is a state not of feelings, but of the will. That state of the will, which we have naturally about ourselves and must learn to have about other people. Christian love or charity for our neighbors is quite a different thing from liking or affection. We like or are fond of some people and not of others. It is important to understand that this natural liking is neither a sin nor a virtue, any more than your likes and dislikes in food are a sin or a virtue. You agree or disagree? Or what do you think he means by charity? I think we've been talking about it a lot already. That we literally, we need to be able to be willing to give other people the same benefit that we would want. And that it isn't really a matter of our feelings, because I think that's what I was trying to say before. To see a difference of doing deciding something of your will and of feeling, having feelings.
It's kind of
It's our
about
action.
acceptance and respect, right? Of others, our neighbors.
Yeah.
It's
And
loving
you
our
decide
neighbors
to do.
and
Yeah.
right.
Go ahead.
Natural liking is neither a sin nor a virtue.
Yeah, you don't have to like someone that you just don't like. I mean, people have personality clashes. There's people that as hard as I could try, I don't think I'm ever going to like them. But that doesn't mean that's different from having a state of will where I want them to thrive in their own way, however they do it. So your liking is a feeling. He's saying liking something is a feeling, and that's not a sin. Let's go back. Let's go on to the next and see if it clarifies it. Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the greatest secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. So I'm going to ask you if you think that's true or not. Conversely, he says, the Germans perhaps at first ill-treated the Jews because they hated them. Afterwards, they hated them much more because they had ill-treated them. The more cruel you are, the more you will hate. And the more you hate, the more cruel you will become. And so on in a vicious circle forever.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
But isn't
Doesn't
it what we talked about before, that if you learn some story about someone and it's a bad story, and then you find that there's some good in that person, then you have to change your thinking about them. But
Yep.
if you really want to dislike them, you
can't.
will find ways to dislike them. And you
Yep.
won't want to hear anything good about them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
And I really think there's something in our human nature about this cruelty thing. To me, it's almost like you get dug in a certain position, or you get dug in that you're going to resent someone that they did you so wrong for so many years. That's it. And so you begin to hate. I think this explains a lot of things, family issues. I think it explains wars and hate in the Middle East and other places. It just never seems to go away. You hate them so much, and then you ill-treat people. And then there's this thing where if you've ill-treated someone, you don't want to have to turn around on it, so you're just going to hate them all the more.
And then it's generational, and the people coming behind you don't know how to act any differently because they don't have a model of how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so exhausting emotionally because you waste and spend so much energy and effort to make sure that you're going to go out of your way to be mean and cruel. And it's exhausting. It's just really hard on the body to spend all that time and effort of how you're going to just not like that person. And you've already made up your mind you're never going to like them.
Yeah,
Yep.
you don't even have to do anything mean and cruel. You
Right.
just have to keep the enmity alive inside.
Right.
You know, not have
Absolutely.
anything to do with them.
And we get a certain satisfaction out of that, don't we?
That statement about that the Germans at first ill-treated the Jews because they hated them.
Yeah.
Why did,
Yeah.
you got to answer that question first. And I
Why-
think it's not because their leaders all put it in their minds that they were to hate them.
Sure.
Yeah.
The leaders sowed the seeds of hate because they knew they could make power out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
And look at the certain instances where they suspended fighting. You know, there's stories about the Germans and was it the Germans and the Americans? Yeah.
Allies.
At
Yeah.
Christmas, and they suspended the fighting.
Yeah.
And then they went back to fighting.
They had actually had a Christmas meal together or something.
They did. That was a good movie.
And there was some all of a sudden humanity broke in. They saw each other not as enemies. They had kids. One man had kids just like the other man had kids that he loved. And so that going back to that first paragraph, as soon as we find this great secret, when we start behaving as if we love someone, we can actually start to love them. I want to ask you if that's really true. And I really do think I have examples in my life where I didn't like someone, but somehow we got put into some kind of context where I had to get to know them. I think there was this fella at the Council of Community Services, Mary. I thought he was arrogant and awful. Then I got in a committee where I had to work with him, and we had to try and talk about the problems of youth in Roanoke. I like this guy now. I think he's a great guy.
Wow.
I mean, that's kind of a petty example, but I think, do you think that's true, that first part up there?
I see Alice's hand up. There's a hand on her.
Yeah, Alice. Wow.
Yeah, yes. Short answer is yes. I think yes, that when you act kind and you put your own walls and your armor down, and you accept that other person, warts and all, and the more you practice that, you become a more open, caring, loving human, and you find more peace and love in the world. I have figured that out myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a practice. It
Yes.
is. It's you can practice that muscle of forgiveness.
I've been doing customer service at the barn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, yes, I think it's true. I think it's more true than the other converse one. Personally, I don't think every person who, the hate and the cruelty thing. I don't think that's the way it goes for all. I think there are certain peoples in our culture or in the world who have been treated so poorly that cruelty and hatred have been ingrained in them. I don't think most people are that cycle.
Yeah.
I wonder, because I think our jails are full of people who have met with hatred and ill treatment, and they have felt awful about themselves, so that they do despicable and destructive things to themselves. They do it to others, but essentially they're doing it to themselves. And it takes a while to come out of that and to think better of yourself and to admit to it.
But it takes a Christian community quite often to bring that and reinforce in those acts of love that this is who Jesus Christ is, and this is his action of dying on the cross, and that action opens us up to hope and promise to people who've never experienced that. And I think of Martin Luther King, how he is the opposite of what we're describing, but how it is that the Lord makes our hearts receptive, and that
Good segue, because hope is next. Good segue. The top bullet on there gives me hope. The bottom is more like a warning that don't let yourself get in the cycle of hate. because I think it can really be a cycle. I think that's all he's trying. So, we're not at hope yet. Let me go ahead and move to this one, hope, because we're running out of time. Book 3, chapter 10. So he's going to try to define hope a little bit, continually looking forward to the eternal world. And, quote, it does not mean we are to leave the present world as it is. If you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this. Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither. What's he talking about here?
I love that quote.
I do too.
I do too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we do nothing on this earth, that we are stewards. We are important people to be on this earth to do important things. And there's a range of important things. But if all you're concerned about is the earth, then I guess
It's kind of contrary to that saying, he's so heavenly minded, he's no earthly good. But Lewis is saying it's kind of the opposite. That if you really believe there's a God who gave purpose to us in our world, then we have to care. I think that's what he's saying. We have to care here and now. What do you think?
I feel like he is almost paraphrasing, I think, Luke's gospel about the kingdom of heaven is now.
Yes.
And if we're aiming at heaven, it is, to me, it is, we are embracing the kingdom of heaven that is available to us at any time if we act on it.
And that's been through the centuries,
Yeah.
you know?
As those third year EFMers know, lots of centuries.
Yeah. Lewis believed people find it difficult to have hope, difficult to quote unquote want heaven at all. True or false? What are reasons to have hope and what are reasons to lose hope?
Well, I feel like anybody that has gone through chronic illness can understand reasons to lose hope and also reasons to have hope, because the end will happen, at some point.
Right.
But I mean, and that I imagine when you've lived painfully for long enough, you're really ready for a hopeful end.
Yeah.
But I understand along the way that, in daily situations, that it would be easy to lose hope. Doesn't mean you can't gain it back again, but you just get so tired.
I think people who have been wrongly accused
Yeah.
of some atrocity and who have had to fight legal battles and have lost everything, to establish their good name or right the wrong situation, have a hard time having hope.
Yeah.
To fight innuendo and rumor and bad mouthing, and we see it every day in the media and in political situations. It's horrible how many people's lives have been ordinary humans, not extraordinary people, but just ordinary humans had their lives ripped apart because of someone's false witness.
If you were to try and measure the number of loving acts in this country, this is impossible, but I'm going to put, if you were to measure the number of loving acts in this country by 330 million people, in proportion to the number of hateful acts in this country by 330 million people, what do you think the ratio would be?
Wow, that's a fun question to speculate.
But think about your own experience. You talk to people, you see people every day, Kat. You know, don't think about, I mean, think about your sensing it for yourself, not listening to what someone else says.
Well, if I use my microcosm, it would truly be that there are more people. I'm not exactly sure, 2 to 1. I don't know, 3 to 1, 2 to 1, maybe. I do see more people acting kindly, but I feel like I live in a very sweet bubble.
Yeah.
I agree with Kat.
I agree.
I totally agree with Kat.
Yeah. In my experience, I think it'd be like 10 to 1. I think, it's just my speculation, I think if someone actually could magically measure all that,
Wow. Yeah.
it'd be like 10 to 1. But we have, so this is to answer the question, why do people find it difficult to have hope? Because the negative sells. Because this whole idea that we're gonna describe this story in the newspaper or wherever it is in the scariest, most negative possible light we can, because that's what people are going to go and read, right? I don't know why that's in our nature, but that makes us lose hope. And I think church and Christianity and Jesus Christ said the opposite. He said, no, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All you got to do is plant this mustard seed and it will spring up, and, you know, and your good deeds will multiply. I mean, he didn't say it exactly like that, but do you see what I'm saying? It's a state of mind.
Yep.
Too.
Well, you know, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but you know,
No.
we're all pretty living easy here on this mountain, all of us. And I think about the people in the inner cities who don't have the money to pay the electric bill or to buy the food for their kids, or, you know, whatever. We don't know hardship like that. Those folks could lose hope because, you know, they might say, where is my God if I can't feed my family, or if I can't pay for my kids' tuition, or,
Yeah.
you know, we live in this really beautiful space, and we have we have worries, but you know what I'm saying? I'm just comparing us to those who really.
Yeah, and I hear you, and I am very sensitive to that because I worked in the inner city for 22 years. And yes, I saw disadvantaged people. I saw hatefulness in families, but I also saw 10 different agencies with people working with these other people. I saw the family members who came in and talked to us and said, I will do this, I will do that for that person, and the neighbors. All I'm saying is there's a counterbalance normally, I think, in human communities, that there are people who understand this. And I don't know if the proportion's off or not, but, you know, I don't want this to boil down to income and economics. And I know you're not trying to make it be that way, but I saw in my career huge numbers of kind people doing kind things.
Mm-hmm. People who would step forward with their money, but people who would step forward with their time, or taking in someone and supporting them, you know, paying the tuition for a child who needed to go to a school because they were having a hard time at a public school and needed, you know, a more secluded educational experience to nurture them along. And someone paid the tuition for this child. We saw that.
And there are examples where the kids fell through the cracks too. I'm not being Pollyanna here. I'm just saying that if you come from the attitude that there are good things we can each do every single day, really, in our life, and if people would take those opportunities, that's a Christian belief to me.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. We can't get dragged down in despair. Lewis says he gave a couple reasons for the lost hope. He says, first, we have not been trained. Our whole education tends to fix our minds on this world. And 2, when the real want for heaven is present in us, we do not recognize it. And then he in some of his other writings, he talks a lot about this feeling of longing. I'm going to go one more. Lewis thinks we're born with desires, and if we correctly interpret these desires, they lead to God. Creatures are not born with desires, says Lewis, unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it.
Whoa.
I think this is the most profound thing I've read so far.
Yeah. And it's a little off the topic of hope we were just discussing, but it is a recognition that we all have desires. We all have a need for hope. We all are trying to find some contentment and stuff. And Lewis says in this and other writings that he never found perfect contentment. That as much as he always thought, in his book, The Shadowlands, he talked about that it's always seemed to be just right around the corner, that this contentment, this paradise was just out of his grasp. And that's why he wrote that last bullet there. He said, if nothing in this earth really satisfies me completely, he's trying to say, it means that maybe I was made for another world. And this is where he's trying to get us to see beyond this world to the next world.
Hey, Tom, don't you think that
Yes.
a lot of his writings are a reflection of the time in which he lived?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
He had a terrible tragedy in his life. Yeah.
I wonder if he thought the world was going to come to an end with the war. Of course, he
Yeah.
wrote this after the war, didn't he?
No, this was written in 1943. The war was not over.
Okay, so it was not over. Yeah, those were dire times. I think if we have sadness in our lives, it's easy to let that darkness overtake us, so that all we see is that. This is on a small scale. I remember Shannon, and I don't think she would mind me telling this. She would come home from school sometimes, and there would be one thing that just made her day awful. And she would come home and I'd say, well, how was your day? Let's talk about your day. And she would just glom on to that one dark period in the day, but it hung with her all day long, so that was the one thing that she talked about at the end of the day. And so we would have to work back through the day to find some bright moments that took the darkness away and opened up the day, so that it wasn't just crap. Sorry to use that word, and there were lots of days like that they would just hurt her soul. They would hurt her feelings. She was very sensitive, and it was hard. But I can see that now. She's not like that now. But at that time, it was very worrisome to me that we had to do such hard work to get, to where it wasn't the whole day. It was just that was one aspect of the day, but it colored her day so much. Is that, I think that is a way to lose hope, to just have those things, those dark moments just take us over. And we need other people to give us a perspective, a different slant on it, not to ignore the part that's hurt us, but to be a different light.
Mhm.
You know, to see things in a different light, to see the fun that was there, or the other person that she helped, that she talked to.
Tom, I apologize. I have to leave, but thank you.
Okay, no problem.
It was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Bye, Lucy.
Bye.
See you next week.
Bye-bye next week. Yeah, we'll just wrap up here. It kind of made me stop to think about correctly interpreting our desires.
Right.
You know, that's kind of a big deal.
It is.
Are our desires just be comfortable for 87 years in this life and then poof, we're gone? Or is our desire something that deeper, that more lasting? Go ahead, Kat.
I feel like he's advocating, you know, that unsettled, I'm not in the place that I ultimately will be. I feel like he's saying it is good to have something in you that not all, maybe you don't necessarily feel it all the time. Maybe it's one of those ever present yet not always surfacing desires. You're not cognizant of it day in and day out. But when you go way inside to just ask yourself, it looks like to me he's saying it is a good thing to recognize inside.
Yeah.
And to not lose hope and to keep reaching. Your reach ought to exceed your grasp always, right?
Yeah. And if I can just also say in Ecclesiastes 3, it states that God has put that desire for eternity in our hearts. So whether we, and then he provides a way for us to recognize that longing, that we always are wanting to go home, and it does give us that hope. But I also want to add to that, a person who helped me understand that is a person by the name of Elie Wiesel, who wrote the book Night.
Oh, yeah.
And he said in there, as far as hope goes, that everything was taken from him. Everything, his family, even in his cell, he was naked. There was nothing. But he realized through that in prayer that God had given him the ability to respond. He took the word responsibility and turned it. What is my ability to respond? And so not if God is going to be here, but to expect him. And that expectation pointing us ever home to him. But that's just one. Yeah.
I like you using the expression of going home. And this longing Lewis talks about in other things he's written too is akin to nostalgia. Who here has tried to go home back where you grew up, whatever?
Oh yeah.
To get and had that feeling of nostalgia, but then when it sinks in, it's not the same. I mean, for our whole marriage with Mary, I've always wanted to move back to New York. And Mary was always afraid I'd somehow get my wish. But you really can't go home. It's that nostalgia. It's, you know, I have a hunger for something that's not going to satisfy. But God is telling me.
Yeah.
God is telling me through my wife and other ways what can satisfy that. Does that make sense? And it's something I can't understand totally, and that's okay.
Yeah. Amen.
And that's hope. And that makes hope for me.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry I kind of pushed this through, but I think it was good. I think there's a lot of good thoughts here, and it's stuff I'll keep thinking about probably for another hour after we leave.
Well,
So
can I
next
say
week.
something?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that if all of our contentment and all of our desires are met here on earth, that's the reward.
Yeah. Jesus kind of said that, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
Yeah. Well, good. I know that was a lot to go through. You know, these chapters aren't that long, but when I start I mean, I chopped this down probably 30%. But anyways, I like your comments. We'll do this again with, I think, your 3 or more chapters next week on faith. There's 2 chapters on faith. One he calls making and begetting, and then the 3 personal God, the Trinity. Oh boy, that's going to be something. So thank you for coming, and I really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you here again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Any
Tom.
We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
But wait,
Good night.
I have a question, Victoria.
Sure.
I've always said Eli Wiesel. How did you pronounce that?
Vizel.
Wiesel, Elie Wiesel. That doesn't mean I'm correct at all.
Same
Well,
thing.
it might mean I'm really incorrect.
It's probably
I just,
Yiddish.
Wiesel.
yeah. The German, I don't think in the German pronunciation the W sounds more like a V. Elie Wiesel.
Wiesel.
But we must speak to a German person to confirm that, I think. Yeah. We won't be here next week, but we'll miss you all very much.
Okay. Where are you going?
Oh, we're going up to Baltimore to visit David and
That's
Kate
right.
Knapp. Yeah.
You have a good trip and be safe.
Thank
job.
you.
All right.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.
I miss you. Bye.